In the 1850s, the United States was moving closer to conflict. Issues between free and slave states were pushing America to civil war. After defeating Mexico in 1848, the U.S. gained new lands in what is today California, Nevada, Utah, parts of Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming. Since these lands were outside of the Louisiana Purchase area, the Compromise of 1820 did not apply, so the government had to decide if slavery would be allowed or not. The issue was settled with the Compromise of 1850, where California came into the United States as a free state. Then, any other area would be open to slavery. Washington, D.C. would ban the slave trade, but slavery would still be allowed there. The final part made a stronger fugitive slave law that required any person that found a runaway slave to return them to their master or face punishments by the government. This allowed the spread of slavery into new lands, which angered many in the northern states. In 1854, Senator Stephen Douglas from Illinois proposed making the remaining parts of the Louisiana Purchase into two territories, Nebraska and Kansas. If these areas were organized into territories, then the government could allow a railroad to be built through them. This was important to Stephen Douglas because he owned land and would become quite wealthy by selling it to the railroad company. To get it passed through Congress, they needed Southern senators to vote and agree on it. The South refused to vote in favor of making the Nebraska and Kansas territories because the Missouri Compromise line prevented slavery there. Stephen Douglas suggested that if the South would vote to approve the Kansas-Nebraska Act, creating the territories, he would agree to allow these territories to vote on whether they wanted slavery or not. Allowing people to vote on whether they wanted slavery or not was called popular sovereignty. This would basically eliminate the Compromise of 1820. It eventually passed, which led to thousands of people from the North and South moving to Kansas so they could vote on whether the state would be free or slave. The slavery and anti-slavery groups that moved into Kansas started violent attacks on each other, leading to the area being called Bleeding Kansas. Another effect of the Kansas-Nebraska Act passing was the creation of the Republican Party. Many Northern congressmen who were part of the Whig and Democratic parties left over allowing slavery to spread and created the Republican Party. In 1857, a Supreme Court case called Dred Scott v. Sandford, where a slave, Dred Scott, sued for his freedom, ended with the court stating that all people of African descent, free or slave, were not United States citizens and therefore had no right to sue in federal court. It also concluded that the Fifth Amendment protected slave owners' rights because slaves were their legal property. The decision also argued that the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional. This meant that Congress had no power to prevent the spread of slavery and basically allowed slavery everywhere. In 1858, Stephen Douglas was running for re-election to the Senate. His opponent was an unknown man by the name of Abraham Lincoln. The two of them had several public debates, which became known as the Lincoln-Douglas debates. They discussed their views on slavery and other issues. Although Lincoln lost the election, he became famous for his speaking abilities and witty remarks. The Republicans would later choose him for their candidate in the presidential election of 1860. In 1859, a Northern abolitionist, someone who wanted to free slaves, named John Brown, went to Harper's Ferry, Virginia. Virginia allowed slavery. Harper's Ferry, Virginia, is where the United States had a large arsenal. This is a building where they keep weapons for the army. John Brown and his 22 followers planned to attack the arsenal and then use the weapons they captured to arm local slaves and lead them throughout the South, freeing slaves by force. The plan failed. Brown was caught and hung. The South believed that Northern governments had paid Brown to attack, and that this would continue to happen. Many Southern states were considering leaving the United States at this time because they feared they would continue to be under continuous violent attacks like these from the North. All of this background helps us understand why the election of 1860 was so important. The United States was split over the issue of slavery spreading. Violence over this issue had already taken place in Kansas and Harpers Ferry, Virginia. When Lincoln tried to run for the Senate 2 years before, he and Stephen Douglas had several debates. Lincoln made it clear that he thought slavery was wrong and he did not want it to spread. Lincoln did not appear on any Southern states' ballots for the presidential election of 1860 because of his views. He received 0 votes in these states. The western state of Missouri was the only slave state to put Lincoln's name on the ballot. He took 4th out of 4 candidates. When Abraham Lincoln was elected president, many in the South were prepared to have their states leave the U.S. They felt Lincoln's election meant the end of slavery. They believed their only choice was to create their own country. The election took place in November of 1860. By December of that year, South Carolina had declared that they were seceding or leaving the United States. The current president, James Buchanan, did nothing to stop South Carolina because he knew he would not be president after March. He did not want to be the one who started the war. In the 1860s, presidents elected in November did not take office until March 4th. This gave the government time to get everything switched over to the new leader. This is why 6 more states, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas, all seceded or left the United States before March 4th, 1861, when Lincoln would become the new president and be able to use the military to prevent them from leaving. Within a month after becoming president, Abraham Lincoln would have to deal with the start of the Civil War. That would tear America apart, have families fighting against one another, and lead to more American deaths than any other American conflict.